Let it go, make my body go, make our bodies higher and higher.
If you have more than one workbook open, sometimes it's advantageous to see a portion of each of those workbooks. And at other times, when you're focusing only on a single workbook, it might be to your advantage to be able to see different worksheets of that same workbook. It can get a little confusing at times if you do have multiple workbooks open and you're trying to accomplish both of those objectives at the same time. We need to have 3 files open right now. 0901 Home Products line, 0901 Regional Sales, and 0901 Employee Table. Now, maybe the files are interrelated, or maybe we're going to be copying information from one file to another. How do we get back and forth between files? On the View tab, if you click the Switch Windows button, you'll see which files are open and which one we're currently seeing. Of course, its heading is at the top of the page, and we can easily get here and switch. If you're working on the Home tab or the Formulas tab or the Data tab, if you're doing that frequently, it could get a little annoying that you always have to go back to the View tab. So a reminder that any button in this ribbon menu system is also a candidate for the Quick Access toolbar. So to make this a little handier and always have this button available, let's right-click on the Switch Windows button and add it to the Quick Access toolbar. And there we see it up there, the icon of different sheets. So that means if we're on the Insert tab, Formulas tab, or whatever else we might be doing, we could go to this button and switch files. It could also be faster by way of the keyboard. Now, Control-Tab could be the button you want. If you use this repeatedly, you might seem to think that it's favoring one over the other. At other times, click Control-Shift-Tab. So for a moment here, I'm just clicking Control-Tab. I'm going from Home Product to Employee to Region to Employee to Home Product to Employee. It always goes back to Employee. Now, if I use Control-Shift-Tab, it'll switch to the others. Now, hopefully you don't have 10, 12 files open at the same time. You could, but Control-Tab can be particularly handy when you have only 2 files. And when you're switching back and forth frequently, Control-Tab is really handy. Experiment with that a little bit, and you'll get the hang of it. Control-Tab or Control-Shift-Tab. But there's always this button, if you put it on the Quick Access toolbar, that's really handy as well, too. Now, suppose we need to see a portion of all 3 of these. Go to the View tab, choose Arrange All. And in this dialog box, make sure, if we're talking about different workbooks, do not check the box for Windows of Active Workbook. Now, there are 4 choices up here. Tiled is often the best. Let's click OK. If you have an odd number of files, and here we're talking 3, one of them will have the larger portion of the screen. If I want the worksheet to the lower right to be dominant, I'll click there, and from there I'll choose View and Arrange All and OK, and that workbook, the Home Product Line workbook, will be on the left side of the screen. I'll have the lion's share. But even here you've got some options too. If we point to the boundary here, I'm sliding the mouse rightward here to that split between the different workbooks. I can click and drag this way, and then on the other side do this. Now this can be a little tedious, could take some time, but there could be some situations where you need to see portions of each of these. And in each of these, independently of the other, you can use that zoom slider bar and zoom back to possibly see more data. I'll do it in the bottom one too. And if it's important to see more and more data in these different workbooks here, we can also quickly, by double-clicking the current tab in each one, so for example in the upper right window here, I'll double-click View. That collapses the menus to show only the tab. We can easily get to that. Another way to do that too is in the upper right corner of each window, you'll see the icon here with the arrow, Ribbon Display Options. You can do it that way too. So for the moment, we're on the setting, Show Tabs. Auto Hide the Ribbon completely does this. Now, that's kind of confusing because it favors just the one workbook. So back up to the top of the screen, click, and let's go back to that button and choose Show Tabs. And once again, we'll have to revisit View to get this back in shape. So, Arrange All, tiled, okay. There could be cases where, not necessarily if the files are similar, but there could be cases where you might want to arrange these horizontally. Go to any of the View tabs here and choose Arrange All and choose Horizontal. Now it looks like it's not very effective here, particularly because of the menus. So in this middle workbook, I'll double-click View to collapse that. That helps a little bit. And the other ones are all set. Probably not the best choice most of the time, but vertical is hardly any better. Going back to one of the View menus here. View, Arrange All, Vertical. Click OK. Perhaps better than horizontal, but we see what's happening here. Again, tiled tends to be the best. Look at the menu. A bit tricky to get to now. There's View and Window and Arrange All. Back to tiled. So sometimes it's just a question of you're looking at data, you're not doing much more than that, you're comparing the information, different worksheets. There could be other times when copying and pasting you could do from here. This is not a requirement. If I wanted to somehow copy this information here onto another worksheet, I don't necessarily have to see it, but I could copy it and then jump to the other worksheet and paste it. But here we see the two on the same screen. Maybe that's a little clearer at times. Now, if we want to go back to a normal view here, we can simply maximize one of these. I'm going to go to the employee table in the upper right corner, maximize. It's now full screen. I'll bring back the menu by double-clicking view. It's back. I can get to the other ones by way of Control Tab. There's that one. I could maximize that one too. So we can bounce back and forth in different ways and bring back the entire ribbon icons too, just by double-clicking view here. And again, consider those options. Now, one of these workbooks has a few sheets in it. Employees table, furniture sales, project budget, and so on. So we might want to see different worksheets of the same workbook. Now, if you go to Arrange All, and in this dialog box, choose Windows of Active Workbook, that seems to be what we want to do. Let's click OK. Well, that didn't really do anything. What we need to do on the View tab is choose the button to the left of Arrange All, New Window. Open a second window so you can work in different places. But that seemingly does very little, a little blip on the screen there. And the View tab has disappeared. Let's go back to View and add another window. And maybe another. In other words, we have added, or we're on the path to adding, 3 new windows. Let's now go back to View and Arrange All. We have this box checked. Windows of Active Workbook. Click OK. Kind of crowded there, probably because of the menus more than anything else. And for the moment, it looks like we're seeing the same worksheet over and over and over again. So one by one, I'm going to go to each window and double-click the View tab. Upper left, upper right, bottom left, and bottom right. Now, in the upper left window, I'm going to choose Employees Table. I'm looking at that data. Upper right, I'm going to choose Furniture Sales. Now, just below that, I'll go down here. I might have to use the arrows to see different sheet names. I'm going to choose Mixed References. And over to the left here, another one. Now, you really have to have your wits about you as you're doing this, because at different times, it's a really crowded screen. And the scenario I'm using here might be a little different than what you're thinking of. Can we do this on workbooks where the sheets are very similar? Well, of course. But I might be in a situation here where I'm trying to copy data. I need to have these visible. I think you can sense this is going to be a little easier if we have only 3 or only 2 sheets, but it's working here, and as long as we see this information, fine. Notice also something a little strange maybe. The heading at each of these, this says 0901 Employee Table. Can't quite see it all, but each of these has a slightly different name next to it. And this says Table 1, up above it says Table 2, far upper left it says Table 4, and down below this it says Table 3. And here too, like in our previous example, if we want to get back to full screen, we can do that, but it's a little bit different here. We actually want to close these. And this looks as if we're closing a file, but we're not. We're actually closing a window. So let's say we don't need this display anymore. We've either observed the data we want to see, or we've done the copying and pasting and so on. Let's close these windows one by one, 3 of them. Go to the upper right corner of any one, click the X, it's closed. Another one, click the X in the upper right corner. It seems like we're closing a file or not. Now if we did this on the last of the 4 windows, we'd be on that path, but we're not. We'll just maximize that. So it can get a little confusing at times. There will be times though that you really want to see different worksheets of the same workbook. We just saw how to do that. And at other times you want to see portions of different open workbooks. We're looking at a workbook called 0902 Regional Sales. We're looking at an east sheet. I'll click the Midwest sheet. Same layout. South, west, an empty sheet 1, empty sheet 2, and a sheet 3, which still has the generic name, sheet 3. We can easily rename sheets. One way is to right-click a sheet tab and then rename. And at that point, we can start typing, but it's simply faster to double-click it. Let's double-click sheet 3 and call it performance scores or annual scores. You can have spaces in a sheet tab name. You can use up to 31 characters. Annual scores. When you use formulas that refer to sheet names, those that have spaces in them also use automatically embedded single quotes. It might make some formulas look a little bit more complex, but there's nothing really wrong with a space in a sheet name, and sometimes it improves readability. Again, change a sheet name, simply double-click and start typing. We can also insert a sheet at any time, and there's some quick ways to do that too. If we're about to put in a new region here, say a mountain region between south and west, we could, if we wanted to, right-click on the west sheet and choose Insert and go down that path, and certainly nothing wrong with that. There's Worksheet, click OK, and so on. We can do that. But there are two shortcuts. If we want a sheet to the left of west, we can press Shift F11. So watch the sheet tabs as I press Shift F11 to the left of west. We're going to see something. And there it is, a sheet 3. Now at other times we might want a sheet to the right. Maybe we're going to have an international group after west, so we could click west. If we want a sheet to the right of that, there's a plus out here just beyond the last sheet name. You'll see it out here, a single plus, new sheet. That adds a sheet to the right of the current active sheet. As it turns out, we might not need this. I'm going to right-click and delete a sheet. There's nothing in the sheet, so there's no warning. However, if you try to delete a sheet that has data in it, you will get a warning. And it's somewhat of a strong warning. Suppose I right-click on annual scores. I'm on the path. Maybe this is a mistake, or maybe I really want to get rid of it. But when I click delete, Excel stops because there's data in it and says Microsoft Excel will permanently, and I'm emphasizing it, permanently delete this sheet. Do you want to continue? If I click delete, I will not be able to use the undo capability to get this back. And what I possibly could do is close this file without saving it if I mistakenly deleted this. But what if I've done a lot of good things along the way without saving? Those are all going to be lost. So a strong warning here, don't delete a sheet unless you really are sure of it. In fact, most of the features that we see when we right-click a sheet tab cannot be undone. If you insert a sheet, of course that's not a huge problem. You can't undo the insert, but you can certainly get rid of the sheet. You can't undo the rename, but of course you could rename it. Move or copy you can't undo either, but of course you can move and copy and move it back and forth differently. Tab color you can redo, but that's not a big deal. So there are some other choices here. Keep in mind too, there will be times when you might want to hide a sheet for any number of different reasons. Maybe this is semi-confidential. Simply by hiding it, some people will not be able to see it. I'll right-click and hide this sheet. You might say, couldn't another user looking at this workbook come along and right-click and unhide? Well, that's true, and that person could. However, there's another feature. You could protect the workbook, and that's covered in another portion of this course. So different techniques here for renaming the sheet. A simple double-click. We can insert a sheet either with buttons or by right-clicking. Remember, Shift F11 inserts a sheet to the left of the current sheet. The plus symbol here to the right inserts a sheet to the right. Or we can delete a sheet simply by right-clicking and deleting. But of course, be very careful with that. In this file called 0903 Regional Sales, we're looking at the East sheet. Here's a Midwest sheet, South sheet, Pacific sheet. To be in sync with other data that we keep track of, we need to move the South sheet and put it in front of the Midwest. Or phrased another way, we could move the Midwest sheet, put it after South. Moving a sheet simply means dragging the sheet tab and putting it before or after other sheets, leftward or rightward, wherever we want to put it. I'm dragging the South sheet leftward, putting it in front of Midwest, and there it is. Very easy to move a sheet. No commands needed. I might want to make a copy of one of these sheets. Maybe what I'd like to do is to create a sheet that has the same layout as all these, but I'm going to create some summary formulas there. How might I create a copy of one of these sheets? Almost the same way. Now, if you didn't know what I'm about to show you, you would probably, and certainly sensibly, right-click the Sheet tab and choose Move or Copy. I doubt very many people use this for moving, but for copy, not a bad idea. It's got an added advantage too. When you copy a sheet, and you do have to check the box below here, not only might you copy it to a different location in this sheet, you could copy it to a new book, or if you have other workbooks open, you could copy it there. And you'll even have the option of copying it between whichever sheets you want in that other workbook, because they will be listed. Now, I simply want to create a copy of this sheet in a new workbook. Click OK. Remember, we're currently viewing 0903 Regional Sales. We're about to see a new workbook. Top of the screen says Book 2. It's got a single sheet in it called Pacific. So we had right-clicked on the Sheet tab in the other file, chose Copy, and then New Workbook, and here we are. I'll press Control-Tab to go back to the other workbook, and here we are. If you'd like to make a copy of a sheet in the current workbook, we can simply drag a Sheet tab left or right with the Control key held down. And there's a tiny plus there. I'll just drag it to the right and let go of the mouse. Remember, the rationale for doing this might be, I'm about to create a summary sheet here. These two sheets are identical in all respects except for the name. So next order of business might be simply rename this. I'll double click and type summary, write some formulas here, or just take out this data, and all the other formulas would work eventually correctly. I'd rename that as well. I'm not doing that here, but it's easy to make a copy of a sheet in the same workbook. Simply drag the Sheet tab with the Control key held down. Be sure to let go of the mouse first. We can copy a sheet. It also makes sense at different times to change different sheets if they have the same layout. Now, they don't have to have exactly the same layout. In this example that we're about to show you, they do. But let's imagine on the East sheet, South sheet, Midwest, and Pacific sheet, we want to change the layout here by putting in a new row between rows 6 and 7. So how do we select multiple sheets? If there's a whole group of sheets we want to select, we'll click either the first or the last, it makes no difference, then hold down the Shift key and go to the other end. So I clicked Pacific first, and now with the Shift key held down, I'll click East. Notice the top of the screen, we'll see the word Group. The word Group means at least 2 sheets are grouped. And the display of the sheets looks different. You can see how these 4 sheets look different than the other ones that are not part of the group. So while these are grouped, any action we take here is going to be happening on all sheets. So if I right-click row 7 and insert, I might be looking at the Pacific sheet and seeing that, but if I click over on Midwest, the same thing has happened. On South, also East, it's happened on all of these. Now, it's up to you to remember that they're grouped, and you probably would, so we can ungroup at some point, but I remember not that long ago forgetting for the moment that these were grouped, and I did something like change this number. I was thinking I was viewing the East sheet, so I changed that to 2000, and I pressed enter, and then I thought, whoops, wait a minute here. Are we still grouped? Yes, we are. You see group at the top of the screen. So if I go to South, see what's happening, 2000, Midwest, it's there, it's also in Pacific. I better undo this. Control Z. There we are, back to normal, so to speak, or back to the correct indicator. If I really, truly wanted to change East only, I can ungroup. 2 ways. You can click one of the sheets that's not part of the group, or right-click the current tab and ungroup the sheets. But it's a handy feature. If there was some rationale that said you needed to make a change to 2 of these sheets and they're not adjacent, you can use the Control key. So if I want to make a change to the South sheet and the Pacific sheet, I've already clicked South. With the Control key, I'll click Pacific. You see the word Group at the top of the screen, but the only 2 sheets that are grouped are Pacific and South. So if I make a change now, I'll do the same kind of thing again. I'll right-click on row 7 and insert. That has happened on the Pacific sheet. It's happened on the South sheet. It didn't happen on Midwest or East. Now, of course, what I just did wasn't really that useful, so I'll press Control Z to undo it. It also, along the way, ungrouped. So it's easy to use. It's easy to make changes this way. And although usually the worksheets are exactly alike, they don't have to be. There could be times when you say, I've got a bunch of different worksheets, even with different layouts. upper left corner, maybe I want to put the date or something like that. So group the sheets, you can do it that way as well. So you've got control over sheets, and when you've got that layout situation where you've got multiple sheet tabs with similar layouts or almost identical layouts, it's easy to make changes to all of them at the same time. In this movie, we need to have two workbooks open. One 0904 regional sales we're currently seeing. And by pressing Control Tab, the other one we need to see is 0904 employee table. Let's look at the regional file first. We can also switch files by going to the Switch Windows button on the View tab in the ribbon, over to regional sales. It's not uncommon to write formulas that get data from other worksheets within the same workbook. And in this workbook, we've got sheets for East, Midwest, South, Pacific, and that's not a requirement for what we're about to do, at least initially. We've got another sheet called Regional Totals. We simply want to write a formula here that gets data from the other sheets. I'm going to start with equal. Click on the East sheet. I'm aiming for the retail total here. When I go to the East sheet, that retail total is in cell F3, so I'll click it. Then a plus, and now I'm going to go to the Midwest sheet. These sheets do have the same location, so I'll be clicking on F3 in each one of them. As I'm doing this, you might note in the formula bar how the formula is being built. I am not typing sheet names or cell addresses at any time as I do this. Another plus, I'll go to South and click the appropriate cell, plus, and then go to Pacific, click the appropriate cell. No final plus needed. Enter. We've got a result. Here's the formula. I double click. I didn't type sheet names. Notice how sheet names are followed by exclamation points. That's what Excel does. In these examples, all the sheet names are followed by exclamation points. If the sheet name has a space in it, and none of them do, you'll see single quotes in there as well. So even though I don't spell Midwest with a space, I'm going to do it momentarily, I'm going to change the sheet name of Midwest. I'll double click that sheet tab and put a space between D and W and press enter. Back to the formula. What's happened? Double click. We can see this. Single quotes. Doesn't make the formula any worse, really. Still workable, readable. We get correct results. I have, however, seen certain formulas that gather data from multiple sheets. If the sheets have spaces in them, it just makes certain formulas make a little bit longer, a little bit more complex maybe. But certainly nothing wrong with it. If I jump back here to Midwest, double click again, I'll take out that space. The formula will have adjusted. Back here. All set. Now, since in each of these sheets, the wholesale and internet totals are just below retail, we don't have to write formulas for the others. We'll simply drag from the corner. By the way, this is not to suggest that when you're writing formulas that get data from other sheets that you're always getting them out of the same cell. We could be gathering multiple data from different locations on these different sheets. This kind of a formula, however, poses some problems if we have more sheets. What if we have 8 regions, 10 regions, 12 regions? Or what if we're working off of a model that has 50 states in it? This is going to get unwieldy. So there's another approach to this. We'll use it in the current model even though we have only 4 sheets. Let's just start by putting in sum. And you can do it fast with Alt equal if you wish. Or you could have typed it. Now what I'm about to do is to click the East sheet and with the Shift key, click Pacific. So at one end or the other, we're going to click the sheet, that's East, and then with the Shift key held down, I'll click Pacific. And in the formula bar, you can see the formula is being built and it's almost ready, but it needs a cell reference. And that cell reference is going to be F3. I'll click it and enter it. That's the same total we saw before. If I expose all these formulas, we can do it on the Formulas tab by choosing Show Formulas. You see the difference? I gotta make column B wider there. There we are. Quite a bit shorter, and substantially shorter if we were dealing with, you can imagine, 50 states. If this were a 50-state model, we might see something like sum, left parenthesis, Alabama, Wyoming, and that's it. But you can imagine what this might look like if we were going to each of the tabs with the state name appearing there. So this is a very efficient way to write certain kinds of formulas, provided the data is in the same locations. Once again, back to this button, Show Formulas. Now, we have another workbook open. Writing formulas that gather data from different worksheets in different workbooks sometimes pose some problems, but we can write these as well. You always have to keep track of those, and that's done in the next movie. We'll talk about how we edit links. But let's go to the other file. On the View tab in the ribbon, we can choose Switch Windows and Employee Table. Over here, we want a total for couches. And in that other workbook, we have to go to each of the other sheets. I'm going to zoom in here using the slider bar in the lower right-hand corner. Click plus a few times. That's one way to use it. Like this, so I can see it more clearly. I'm going to start a formula here. Equal, but I need to get to the other workbook. We can use the View tab or Control tab. View tab in the ribbon, switch windows. Let's go over to Regional Sales. And go to East first. And here's the grand total we need for couches, right there. Put in a plus. Then go to Midwest. Click here, put in a plus. Similar to what we did before, but remember, this formula is actually starting in another workbook. Go to South, click here, put in a plus, and then Pacific. And click here, and enter. There we are. Now it's pretty long because we're dealing with data out of a different workbook. As I scroll to the right, that might loop around a little bit. But here's the idea. And remember, I typed very little here. I went to the other workbook, and the data we're seeing right here is from the East sheet, cell B7. And then we see this being repeated. And by the way, in formulas, there's a little trick that you can use. In really, really long formulas, if they're a bit difficult to read, you can introduce a line break by way of Alt-Enter, as I'm doing right now. And that makes it a little bit easier to read. You can decide where you want to do the break here. I'll do this right before the plus. And we see it looking something like this. Now, this isn't changing the result, but I think it might clarify what we're doing. And remember, I typed almost nothing here. I typed equal. I went to the View tab, switch windows to get to the other workbook. And then, one by one, I clicked on the various sheets and the particular cells. And then I pressed enter. Now, recliners is to the right of this in these other examples, and we could copy that too. But writing formulas that deal with data in different worksheets are problems because, first of all, I would close this file and save it. I would close the other file and save it too. And they're probably in the same folder. But are they necessarily? No, they're not. And what if we move files to different folders? First of all, what I want to show you is what happens when we close the other file. I'm going to go to the other file. Now keep in mind, before I do that, what this formula looks like is this. The other file is open right now. I want to jump to the other file, either with Control Tab or by way of switch windows. I'll use Control Tab this time. I want to close this file and save it. So I can press Control W, that's a fast way, or go through the file menu. Control W, do I want to save this? Yes. Okay. Now, look at this. Not only do we need to see the reference to the other workbook, but we need to see the reference to where this file is. I'm going to zoom back a little bit, and it's quite long. In other words, each of these examples here, we've got a cell reference, a sheet reference, and a file reference, and that file is in a folder called Chapter 09, which is in a folder called Exercise Files, Desktop with my name, Users, C Drive, so on. It looks awfully long and unwieldy. Now, based on what we did, this isn't that complex really, but it sure looks kind of overwhelming when we're seeing it like this. But it's true in the sense that what we're seeing here is accurate. It shows us that link. Now, what if I go out and move that other file? We've got a problem here. And that's the issue. When you're writing formulas that deal with data from different workbooks, that's what you always have to be aware of. And anytime you find yourself in that environment, it's good to make notes and remember that you do have linkage set up. And in the next movie, we'll talk about how to manage some of those links. In this movie, we need to have two files open. 0905 Employee Table, and as I press Control Tab, 0905 Regional Sales. When you write formulas that gather data from different workbooks, you can go to the Data tab and see if those exist by choosing an option called Edit Links. But if it's grayed out, there are no links. However, this can be a little confusing. Links are actually two-way. We've got a source file, we've got a destination file, so to speak. I'm going to go to the other workbook with Control Tab, Employees Table. We're going to write a formula here that gets data from the other workbook. Equal, and how do we get to the other workbook? by way of Control Tab or the View tab in the ribbon menu system. Switch windows, we'll go over to the regional sales file and click on this cell right here. That's the couches total, and enter. We've got a linkage formula here that's getting data from the other workbook. On the data tab here, I'm going to press Control Z to undo that last action. Keep an eye on edit links. It's grayed out. In other words, the formula is not here. In other words, there is no formula linking this worksheet to the other one. I'll press Control Y to bring that back, and now edit links is selectable. Now, it's important to note that when you've got formulas that link to workbooks, the source workbook, if you're looking at it, and I'll press Control Tab, nowhere here do we see edit links. So what we're saying is that in this workbook, there's no information that tells us that there's a formula elsewhere that's gathering data from here. Now, possibly you could stumble across this if you were not the one to have written the formula and didn't know anything about it. If you were to go to this cell and go to the Formulas tab, you can prepare to use Trace Precedence. But how do you know which cell to choose? If I choose Trace Dependence here, it tells me by way of this icon, and I can double click it, that another workbook has a formula, and there's that workbook. It's currently open, and it's got to be open for this to happen. Another workbook that's telling us that it's getting data from here. But that's pretty long odds that you would ever stumble across that. Let's remove these arrows here. So there's no link in the source of the formula here. Let's go back to the other workbook, Control Tab. We want to follow this a bit to see what happens when we open and close files. So there's a linkage set up here, and edit links reminds us of that. When we click edit links, we see the other file name. Now, what would happen if this file is closed, we don't see it for a while, we open it a few weeks later, maybe we forgot about that, or maybe we're a totally different person looking at this. Another person might look at this and say, I wonder if there are any links to other workbooks here. I'll go to the Data tab. Edit links is not grayed out, it's selectable. Let's click it. What are we learning here? We know that somewhere within this workbook, there's a link, there's a formula somewhere that's getting data from this other file called 0905 Regional Sales. But this doesn't tell us where it is. But we can track it down in an unusual way. Let's go back to the formula. Now, you'd have to know this first of all. Linkage formulas that involve linkage to other workbooks include brackets and also .xlsx. How often do you see brackets in Excel? Rarely. Now, it's not to say you couldn't see them, but let's say if we can find the cells with brackets, we're going to track down those linkage formulas. But imagine if you didn't know where it was. Select all the worksheets here. Right-click any sheet tab, select all sheets, then go to the Home tab in the ribbon, far right button, Find and Select. Choose Find. There's bracket. Now, I've done this a while ago, so you might see it there, you might not see it there. Left bracket or right bracket makes no difference. Then, Find All. It will take us to the first one and potentially show us even more in this list here. In this case, only one. So we've tracked down that formula, and there could be others, although in this case there are not. So that's how we find them, and that's kind of a runaround to do that. Now, going back to edit links on the Data tab. Here's an option, Startup Prompt. These choices are worded a little bit oddly. The last one, don't display the alert and update links. Well, that could be acceptable in some environments, but don't accept the alert and don't update, I think that's unacceptable most of the time. The top choice, even though oddly worded, is the one we want. Let users choose to display the alert or not. It's almost as if it's asking us every time we open this, it's going to question us again and again, do you want to see this alert? What it really means is it's going to ask us if it wants to update. So that's one we want to choose. Let's click OK and close. So let's close this file. We can do this by way of Control W, and I will save the changes. Save right here. Now on the other file, meanwhile, and it could be days later, whenever, I'm going to make a change here to cause this grand total to go over 12,000. So instead of 4870, I'll just make it 5870. So it's well over 12,000. And I will save this workbook and close it. I can do this also by way of Control W. Prompts me to save, I'll save it. So it's a later time. I'll go to File Open, Here's that file that I want to get to, the employees table. There it is. And here's a prompt. What does it say? This workbook contains links to one or more external sources that could be unsafe. If you trust the links, update them. I do. Now, as I click update, watch this number change. It's going to go above 12,000. And there it is. So that helps us keep track of these. I would suggest, in general, shy away from writing links between different workbooks. And yet I do recognize from time to time it's important. Remember, if a workbook has links to other workbooks, in other words, if it has formulas that get data from other workbooks, on the Data tab, Edit Links will be selectable. Remember, if we're looking at the other file, we can go back and open it. We won't see Edit Links at all because it's the source of the formula. It's not the actual formula itself. So a little tricky maybe at times, and it's good to practice with this a little bit. And again, what I had said earlier still is true though. Be a little bit wary of these, be a little bit hesitant about writing formulas that link different workbooks, even though from time to time they are necessary.